Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Friends, welcome to the Encounter program sponsored by the Broome County Council of Churches. I am your host, Mark Kimpland, the pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church. History over the last 3-4 years, during the months of August, September, October, leading into the fall and early winter, we have the joy of introducing to you and inviting to the program new pastors to the Southern Tier. And I covet this time because I get the honor and the privilege to meet with folks that I may not have known prior, and to get to spend some time with you and invite you to listen and to learn from them. And so this is the first round of pastors that we will share with you in the months ahead. So it is my honor and my privilege to introduce our guest on today's show. It is the Reverend Harold Wheat, the new pastor at the Tabernacle United Methodist Church in Binghamton. Welcome to the Southern Tier. Welcome to the Encounter program.
Well, thank you so much, Mark.
I looked forward to this. We've been in touch for a while, since annual conference and such things, to make this happen. So I'm glad that we were able to do this. Let's start here, Harold. Tell us a little bit about Harold. Growing up, give us a little bit of your background that brings you to this place in this moment for our viewers and our listeners.
So I grew up in a small town in central New York below Utica. It's called West Winfield. And it would have been one of those wonderful places to stop on Route 20, which was scheduled to be the road across New York State until the thruway came through. Yeah. And so West Winfield is one of those towns that kind of got lost when that happened. It was a beautiful place to grow up. I grew up outside. I think probably one of the last generations to spend a lot of time in the creeks and on the hills, just spent my entire childhood outside. As I grew up, my family introduced me to the Lord and really helped me to build a faith, not just by taking me to church every Sunday, but by practicing it and meditating on it as things came up in our lives. And so, if we came to challenges, my parents would really help us to think it through, using the symbols and the relationship that grows out of faith. And so I came to faith at a really young age, and I haven't really had one of those going away experiences that so many people talk about. Yes. Certainly I have challenged God, and I have wrestled with God at every stage in my life, but I've always had the privilege of knowing that God was present for me.
Mm-hmm. Now, in those formative years, what school district or church did you associate with in such things as you were growing? What molded that young faith and that understanding God's presence at that time?
Yeah. Well, we had a federated church. I think it's one of the rare churches that managed to bring together 3 different denominations. We had Baptist and Congregational and Methodist. Wow. Now, I also come from a long line of Methodist pastors. On my dad's side, there was a Wesleyan Methodist pastor, and my mom's dad was a United Methodist pastor, and my mom's brother, my uncle, is a United Methodist pastor, and my mom is an organist in the church. So I certainly come from a family that cared a lot about faith and ministry.
Yeah, so you have a lineage there.
I do.
An ecumenical lineage,
absolutely,
which is great. So tell us a little bit about your education as you grow in faith and such things, in that community and such things. Where did you go from there?
So I launched out of that small town into Middlebury College. I got a scholarship from the Clark Foundation and was able to go to Middlebury and had a wonderful opportunity to study at a really top-notch college in Vermont. I fell in love with Vermont and worked there in I'd spend my summers guiding groups that would come from all over the country to do volunteer projects with low-income housing. It was called the Addison County Community Action Group, and we had a really fun time serving and also just learning how to build things that would build up our community.
Neat. Neat.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, in the midst of all of that, there's a call. Can you take me through that a little bit?
I was fairly well known on campus for pursuing God. I just loved to be part of the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, and I was part of the chapel. But I was also just a young man pursuing a history degree and loving life. I wasn't really thinking much about it. I was minding my own business, Mark.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
And one day I was walking across campus and someone stopped me. We had a little chat, and in the process they said, "What are you going to do when you grow up? Are you going to be a pastor?" I said, "Well, I don't know." That same conversation happened 2 more times that day.
That day?
With people that weren't related to each other. And that evening, I talked to God. I said, "Am I going to be a pastor?" And before the words were out of my mouth, I had the sense of peace wash over me that I'll never forget. And I knew that that's exactly what I was going to do. And I also knew that it was going to be a long time because I didn't feel mature enough. So I didn't tell anyone at that time that I had a calling, except my grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were still in college at that time then, or?
I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what happens next? Here you are with this call, and if you're like most of us, especially me, I'll only speak for myself. I spent a lot of time running from that call. But what's your story?
You know, I didn't exactly run from it,
okay.
But I also knew that I wasn't mature enough, and I was deeply afraid of messing it up.
Mm-hmm.
So basically God told me, just go and live a little. So I ended up being part of the United Methodist Mission Intern Program, which is a 3-year program that has half of its expression abroad and then half of its expression in the States. And the two are united by a lot of reflection and practice. So I went to Brazil for a year and then ended up in New Mexico at a retreat center, serving in both places to help people grow in their faith. And it was a really wonderful experience of cultural immersion and getting out of everything I knew about my environment and learning to relate to God under some stress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're trying to weed through that call as to what it may be, what it's not, and through all of that then.
The call sat in the background.
Yeah.
It was kind of on the back burner.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to come due someday.
Yeah.
But I also knew that God was going to give me some time to grow up.
Yes.
And I needed that time quite a lot.
So what happens then following that period of time? There comes a time where you said, "Here I am, Lord."
Yeah.
Take me through that.
Well, I think in the process of working through that adventure abroad, examining my faith, I really came to a moment where I needed to step back and just reflect for a couple years.
Yes.
Needed to understand my position with respect to my society. That I need to understand how my faith related to. We live in a very complex society.
Amen.
And it's easy to grow up in a silo, in a reading or an understanding community, and not really. It gives you lenses to see what's going on around you. But when you take the lenses off and you're looking at it from a different perspective, everything gets jumbled. So I took a couple years just to reflect. I lived in Ithaca, New York, and when those couple years were finished, I'd just been doing maintenance. I just fixed people's houses.
Mm-hmm.
No, no job that needed thought after I got home. I'd get home and that would be it.
Yeah.
But when I got done with that, Rebecca Dolch at St. Paul's and I talked about my call to ministry, and I ended up pursuing that and being accepted at Wesley Theological Seminary in DC.
It's amazing how God puts people in our path. Absolutely amazing, yes. So she helps you discern that call, and you start the process and all of that, and you find yourself in Washington, D.C. Tell us a little bit about your seminary experience.
When I set foot on the campus, they sort of introduced me to a series of people that I could ask questions to, and they passed me from person to person throughout the day. And I got done with that set of conversations, and I had the clearest sense I've ever had in my entire life that I was home. I was at the place where I was supposed to be, and that seminary community and that learning community where we were just trying to figure out who God is was so enriching for me, and it's such a delight. That sense of being home lasted until about a week before I was supposed to go into ministry, 4 years later.
Okay.
It was a place where I wasn't just jumping through hoops and taking courses. I was trying to understand and taking and one of my friends said it's a gourmet meal. So take your time with it. And we did. We had late night conversations in which we were trying to figure out life, the universe, everything, and God.
Yes. That's fascinating. Friends, I'm delighted to be spending time with Harold Wheat, the new pastor at the Tabernacle United Methodist Church. An incredible journey so far. Can't wait to hear more about this. So you went to seminary, still yet discerning the call then. I mean, you didn't say, I've got the call, I've got to do this and jump through these hoops. You went there to just discern life.
So there's a story that comes out of that about 2 years into seminary, I had to complete some paperwork to pursue certified candidacy in the United Methodist tradition. And I handed in that paperwork, and 2 days later, I was sick. And I thought, I just have the flu. It's nothing. Turned out I had mono.
Oh, boy.
And a really bad case of it.
Oh,
I was 6 months in bed. And I had to drop out of school for a semester. I had to really reflect, because it didn't seem like a coincidence to me that I hand in my paperwork and make the decision and step forward in this, and then I get sick. So I realized that I was really pretty terrified of becoming a pastor. The exposure of sharing something that's so intimate for me, my relationship with God, there's nothing closer to my heart. And standing up in front of people and talking about that sounds crazy to me. And I was feeling a sense of being overwhelmed about that. So I took myself to some people who could help me build some interior resources to process, handle, and eventually overcome that fear to be able to become an effective public speaker and really appropriately display my heart and my love for God, so that others could see and model their own faith journeys and pursuit of God.
Yeah. That's a wonderful way of putting that. Yeah. So you make your way through the seminary experience and such things, and you are an official graduate of the institution. What happens next?
Well, I took 3 months to do clinical pastoral education in Seattle, and then I launched for Brazier Falls United Methodist Church and Norfolk United Methodist Church, churches that I'm so proud to have served in the North Country of New York, above Potsdam, about 5 miles off the border with Canada.
That's north. Yes, it is. Yes. And they were good experiences and formative experiences, and okay.
Really wonderful folks up there.
Okay. And eventually you get the call to come to the Southern Tier. And here you are. You're a month and a half in, a month.
That's right. Just a month.
A month in and such things. Tell us a little bit about your first impressions of the church, the area. I mean, here you are. I remember it well.
Well, I've got to start out by saying I'm so honored to be serving the Tabernacle United Methodist Church. What I have found in relationship with this church is that it's a community that has a really deep level of authenticity. These are some folks who have really reflected on their faith and gone to some deep places. They've been willing to take stands for those who are left out of a lot of places in our society. They've been willing to embrace people that some churches won't embrace, and I'm just deeply honored to be with them on this journey. So thankful for the chance we've had to be in conversation already.
That's great. Tell us a bit about your theology, those things in which God has placed in your heart that are passion-filled and emotional, and get to the heart of each breath you take.
There's a couple of commitments that have really helped me become the person that I am today. Obviously, my commitment to follow Christ has been one that has anchored my life and sent me forward in so many ways. But shortly after I made that commitment, I made a commitment to nonviolence. I became a conscientious objector to the practice of war, meaning that there are many people for whom I would lay down my life. But there's not a situation for which I would kill. Because I believe that God has created me to be a vessel of love and a vessel of the Holy Spirit, and that's my contribution to the world. I am a child of the living God, and God in Jesus Christ chose to come into the world, to love the world, and to do no harm. And God knows he had some opportunities to do harm. He had some opportunities when he could have chosen self-defense. He could have chosen defense of his vulnerable disciples, and instead he chose to put himself out there in a way that got him beaten up and eventually crucified. And so I wanted to follow in that pathway. And that vow of nonviolence has just has made me grow more than any other commitment I've ever made. Because I'm always up against the interior parts of myself that don't really line up with that vow.
That don't really care about that vow.
I still get angry, and I have to process that in the presence of that vow, wrestling with that commitment, and that makes me depend more fully on Christ, because I know I can't do this alone. So that's been a big part. Another part was that during seminary, most people come to seminary and they end up becoming more liberal. Seminary has a tendency to tear down one's faith and kind of help you rebuild it, but with a wider lens. That was not my journey. I came to seminary liberal, and I ended up more conservative.
Interesting. Interesting.
And the way this happened was that I came to seminary not believing in the concept of original sin, the concept that humanity has fallen, and there's nothing we can do about it except ask for God's grace and accept that the power of God's grace can transform us, but we can't fix ourselves. I didn't really believe in that coming into seminary. And then I ran into my internalized racism. I found a problem that was lodged within me that came from having grown up in an environment breathing the atmosphere of racism that is part of our culture. And I found that I had biases, I had attachments to privilege that were getting in the way of my ability to really love and be loved. People who look different from me and have a different life experience. So I had to bring this to God and realize, there is a sin that I can't overcome on my own, but I need accountability, I need community, I need the grace of God. The grace of God got so big for me in that moment. And what I learned as I went through that process and began to try and dismantle that racism within me, and really took that journey seriously, I learned that I wanted to explore the embodied reality of being human, because I felt that the identity that I formed around privilege and whiteness, that's an empty and ultimately hollow identity. And I wanted a real one. And so I kept going back to the body. And so as I've studied martial arts and studied the body's capacity for healing, and being a vessel of healing, that journey of embodied ministry, looking for the wisdom of the body to be articulated in Christian ministry, that's also been a really deep way of growing for me in my faith. So one of the ways I've studied that is I'm a martial artist. I've studied the martial art of Aikido for 18 years now, and I'm one belt below black belt. So I'm studying for that black belt. Yes. I'm looking for it. And I've really enjoyed that whole journey.
Friends, again, we are with the Reverend Harold Wheat, the new pastor at the Tabernacle United Methodist Church, on this incredible journey that has brought him to this part of the world to minister to God's people and such. With all of that, with all that you have discerned internally, spiritually, understanding who God is in the midst of, as you defined it, kind of an internal racism and such things, and white privilege, and the martial arts, and all of that. How does that impact the lens in which you see the world in ministry? How does that play out day to day when you wake up in the morning? How does that lead you into your day and in all that you do? I'd be intrigued to.
So for me, ministry begins with the commandment that Jesus gave, that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, and all our strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves. And in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus takes that commandment and then immediately follows it by marking that commandment. He tells a story about a Samaritan. Now, Samaritans were the outsiders. It would be as if Jesus were talking in the suburbs, and he said, and the gang member. That would be the level of dissociation that people would have had with each other at that time. And the Samaritan, the outsider, does the amazing thing. And so he marks that love your neighbor piece with very real sort of sociological identity. And so when I look at the gospel and trying to live the gospel in community in a church, what I'm looking at is the way in which we do, as Cornel West would have put it, he said, justice is what love looks like in public, right? So we're doing love, we're doing that practice of trying to open ourselves up to be vessels, so empty ourselves out a little bit so we have room and hospitality for each other, to set our egos aside and allow relationships to flow. That is a huge part of love. We'd never get over that piece. But there's also this public piece of how do we do love when it's also about the way in which the policies, the laws, the structures of our society are expressing either love or they're not expressing love, right? And so I've been so delighted to be in a church which is actively doing the analysis of, well, how does that work? How does love look like in public? What kind of policies are going to help our larger city and area create a loving environment where people can flourish? And so that's a piece of how to answer that question, I think.
That's an interesting perspective, because we pastors, oftentimes we live in the world. There is a world outside our stained glass windows. You know? And so I guess my question to you, what do you see the biggest challenge in the Christian church these days within our small, oftentimes minute, impotent visions that we have? What would you say in the next few minutes that we have together? What do you see as some of our challenges in the world in which we live?
I think the biggest challenge for the Christian church is to witness the power of God doing things. So the church may be impotent, but God is not.
Absolutely.
And I think to the extent that we can keep our eyes open and keep our hearts attuned to looking for what God is doing and keep hoping for that and not try to do it ourselves. And the tension is that we have to be deeply moved by the situations that we witness. We have to be empathetically connected with the people that we're serving, and we have to be able to hold the tension of waiting upon God and partnering with God. So there are moments in our life where God says, okay, you go do this.
Yeah.
and we lead the charge. And there are moments in our life where we sit still and we allow God to win the battle. And so there's got to be, I think that's where the power is where we are in partnership with God to transform the world and to help people realize that this grace of the Lord Jesus Christ is for each one of us. And so that, for me, it's an incredibly powerful journey.
I like the scenario of the tension. There is that tension between allowing God to do what God's going to do and us partnering in that. So, Harold, I want to thank you. I want to thank you, and the people at the Tabernacle United Methodist Church are blessed to have you as their shepherd, as their, and that is wonderful. And we wish you all the best as you continue this journey and such. And glad you were here with us today.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Absolutely. Brothers and sisters, I hope you have a wonderful week. It's been a blessed time here on the Encounter program, and may God be with you in every breath and God's presence real in your lives. Have a great week. God bless.